Whoever wishes to be saved.
You're also not saved if you don't follow the fast, but you might not be aware of that.
It's not absolutely necessary for salvation to follow the fast, no.
Well, I don't think the Church said it's absolutely a necessity of means, either.
Yeah, it did.
Where does it say that?
Whoever wishes to be saved needs above all to hold the Catholic faith. Unless each one preserves... It doesn't say whoever wishes to be saved must be aware of the Church's fasting laws. It doesn't say that.
No. Again, it's kind of an analogy of an argument. You think very much in black and white, like it's a little too strict, like your methodology of thinking on this. He says everybody who wants to be saved, they need to do this. This is their objective obligation, but they may not be aware in the concrete situations of life. So these things are binding in an ontological way, maybe you might say, that yes, you have to believe these things. These are the divine realities. Some people might be very blinded because of original sin and their upbringing and so many things that they don't realize that and they may not realize that. And then, they have that obligation to do that, just like you have an obligation to fast. You have to fast, to use an analogy, but you might not be aware. And if you don't have the full consent and the full knowledge, it's not rejection.
Well, you said that I'm thinking of it in a very black and white fashion. Well, that's how God reveals it. He says, let your yes be yes, let your no be no, anything else is of evil. Yeah. St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 19, that the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who is preached among you by us, was not, it is, and it is not, but was, it is. In other words, he's saying, I did not come to preach to you contradictory things, that it is and it is not. We don't preach, there isn't salvation outside the Church, but there is salvation outside the Church.
No,
that's what the devil preaches.
Salvation outside the Church.
You don't believe that, Greg. Greg, don't act like you believe that, okay? You don't. You believe Jews can be saved.
My interpretation of that.
Your interpretation of it is that people can be saved who are not Catholic. Okay, just admit it. You believe people can be saved in any religion.
That is possible.
Right. And so don't say you believe that there's no salvation outside the Church.
In that sense.
Yes, they are.
No, what they meant in the historical situation and when they came up with that term.
Well, that's why, people like you...
the treasury of grace that is in the Church.
That's why, people like you will go to hell forever. Deservedly so. Because you're just...
let's not go...
you're just a liar. That's all you are. Period. That's all.
Okay, but then again, see, this is what you do to everybody else with invincible ignorance. I mean, I honestly think that this is a legitimate way of interpreting it, and I don't understand why you can't see how somebody could be honestly ignorant about these things. I mean,
because when you know that the Church teaches that there's only one faith in the Church, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. Okay, how can someone who rejects the Lord and someone who accepts the Lord both be in the same faith and have the same Lord?
Well, I do believe I do have the faith, but
no. You believe that a Jew or Buddhist you believe that a Jew or a Buddhist or whatever Muslim who rejects the Lord can be united to the Church and therefore inside the Church. So therefore, since all in the Church have one Lord, you have to say that the Muslim and the Jew who rejects the Lord has the same Lord as the Catholic who worships the Lord.
Well, if they're in good conscience and they don't know that they're, Pius IX spoke in an allocution, and I know somewhere else too, I'm sure you're aware, that, about invincible ignorance, and if these people are following these things, like St. Paul said to the people at Athens, he said, you have a lot of idols here, and I see one that there's no name on it, and that's the one that you've been worshiping, and that's the one I preach to you.
Yeah, I know. The modernists love that one. He says that, I see that you are overly superstitious, and in another debate I had, the guy tried to say, well, it doesn't mean superstitious. That's the word St. Jerome gives in the Latin. But he's saying that...
they were overly superstitious. Like, I agree with you that's, he was saying that, but he also said that they were, in a sense, worshiping this unknown God, and he said, that's the God I'm preaching to you.
Right, he's saying that
they already kind of have this, that they were following the natural instincts, because everybody by nature has a religious sense, and if someone has never been told the Church, and yet he's following that that religious instinct in him that is placed in him by natural law, then he's not to be found guilty in any way.
Religious instinct. Okay, that's exactly what Pius X condemned in his encyclical Pascendi on the errors of the moderists, that there is in each person a religious sense, okay, and that people can implicitly have this religious sense, and that can constitute true faith. What you're asserting is
that's not quite what he said.
Yeah, it is.
No, everybody by nature is religious, as Thomas Aquinas says. Everybody has an obligation by natural law to worship the Creator, because even in Romans, St. Paul says, we look at, they can look at the world and they can see that there's a God, and therefore if they reject a God, they.
No, but you're saying that religious sense can be sufficient for justification. Okay, that is heresy. And what St. Paul is saying in Acts 17 is that they worship different idols. They were superstitious pagans, but there was one altar which they dedicated to the unknown God. And since they were showing a bit more humility in that instance and acknowledging that they didn't know God, rather than labeling these different false gods as if they knew who the true God was, he was saying that there may be a step closer to hearing the truth, because he's going to preach to them the true God, since they acknowledge that they don't know God. Okay, that's all he's saying. And you're truly twisting the scriptures to your own discretion.
For me. Can you quote that verse for me? Because I'm pretty sure that you're not stating it quite right. I don't have my Bible with me right now, but can you quote where he speaks about the unknown God?
He says in Acts 17:22, Paul, standing in the midst, said, "Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. For passing by and seeing your idols, I found an altar also on which was written, To the unknown God. Wherefore, what therefore you worship without knowing it, that I preach to you."
Well, there you go, right there. That's it. What they worship and they don't know, he preaches to them. So they're already worshiping in the sense...
No, he's saying what you worship as unknown. In other words, what you acknowledge as unknown. We don't know God. I'm going to preach to you the true God, which you admittedly don't know.
That's not what he says.
That is what he says.
Worship is what I preach.
That is what he says.
What they worship is what they preach to you. That's what he says.
What you worship as unknown. In other words, what you acknowledge to be unknown, that I preach to you. That's what he's saying. And
he doesn't say acknowledge, he says what you worship.
Same thing.
As unknown. No, so they're actually worshiping what they don't quite know, and now
you're just twisting the scriptures to your...
the fullness of...
So basically, according to you, they were justified.
Possibly, I'm saying...
Okay, you're a complete apostate. So you believe people can worship multiple idols as long as they say that they don't know God, they could have been justified.
No, well, let's talk about that one verse. I think it's quite obvious what Paul said in your...
No, it's quite obvious to the heretics who want to twist the scriptures to their own damnation. Just like it was quite obvious to the Arians when Jesus said the Father is greater than I, that he wasn't God. Just like that's quite obvious to the Jehovah's Witnesses, okay, when he says things like that in the gospel, that he's not divine. And that's why a Catholic... I already answered it. I already dealt with it and discussed it.
The word said, he says, what you people worship...
As unknown.
As unknown. No,
right.
So they're worshiping something that they don't know. That's what you worship. I preach to you. He's preaching to them what they were worshiping. You see? I mean, you're doing mental gymnastics to get out of that phrase. There's no
I'm not. Because he's saying that they acknowledge this as unknown. Okay? And since they were correct in that they do not know God, he's going to preach to them the true God. That's what he's saying. And furthermore, Scripture is to be... Let me finish. Scripture is to be understood the way the Church understands it. And you are twisting the Scripture to your own damnation. And you don't believe in Scripture at all. I mean, you only believe in Scripture when it suits your heretical demonic yearnings. You don't believe when Jesus said that no man comes to the Father but by me. You don't believe that. You don't believe that at all.
No, I do, but
no, you don't. You believe Jews who reject Christ can be saved.
Well, I don't know how.
There you go. Okay, so don't act like you believe in Scripture. I mean, you're truly... I mean, it's outrageous.
Maybe. I mean, I don't believe it.
And here's another thing
I've been presenting my case sufficiently, but but I want to see your position. I mean, and so like if you could explain to me, but it specifically says right there that what they're worshiping, that thing that they're worshiping, even though it's unknown, he's preaching it to them. And if you can explain to me how there's some other way to interpret that, like the same thing with Trent, like you haven't explained that either. It says you're regenerated, which means you're about.
Well, I mean, I haven't had time to get to all the things you brought.
Or with desire.
No, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It says
is that a mistranslation, or?
Well, you're not quoting it correctly.